All right, we're going to do a little paint along today, and we're going to try our best um, to do it pretty quickly, and we're going to do it all in black and white, and that's important. So I'm going to start with kind of a medium, smaller, flat brush, and I'm also going to have on standby a pretty small brush. It's not in the best shape. It's seen a lot of action this year, and it might not end up that well, but that's okay. So I'm going to get some water. I'm going to water down black. And I'm going to water it down a lot so it's pretty thin. So I mostly just put water next to it and just put a little water down, pulled a little bit of that paint into the water. So I'm going to draw a rectangle here. And when we are painting horizontally like this kind of horizontal shape is also called landscape. That doesn't mean you couldn't have a tall landscape, like say your landscape was about trees or looking up at El Capitan from Yosemite. Those things are very vertical things, so it would make sense to have a very vertical picture. We're not going to do that though. So when you go to take your landscape picture, and you're either going to take one or you're going to find one in your family archives somewhere, some kind of picture, something cool, whether it's at the Metro Parks or somewhere. Um, but that picture is going to be kind of your reference that you're going to build everything else from. Um, Here we go. So anyway, so you might find a picture that works well vertically. That's fine. They call that portrait, but you can also do your landscape that way if it works. So I'm going to kind of make some very low triangle shapes here. Don't make them high like this. They're not like you're not in kindergarten anymore. Really flatten them out. Okay. And I might put some way back over here in the far distance. Maybe a little bit here. That's my background, my furthest away point. Now I'm going to have a little bit of a lake or something here. Maybe it's going to actually go off the page, and then I'll have some kind of a river. Now, notice how when I do a river or something like that, I'm trying to build it at a horizontal marks. Um, some people are going to want to make your river like this, and that's like we're looking down on it from an airplane. I want you to really think about like moving it horizontally, so it's like laying down on the ground coming towards us. Um, so this is part of my midground, and this is my foreground here. I'm just going to do some gentle sloping hills back here in the background, and then maybe I'm going to have like some tree here. Really thinking about how trees might be. I'm not going to look at an actual tree for this, but I have before. So I don't want your tree to look like a feather. So your tree should not look like this. Definitely not. Kind of think about clumping some of that stuff and letting some more natural looking things happen. So I'm going to imagine my light is coming in from this side, from the right side. So I'm going to start painting some darks in here, letting the natural shape of the brush and the strokes come down the mountain, but also be rough to create some natural textures there. Whole thing's going to end up getting painted over a few times, so I'm not going to get too hung up on exactly how that looks. Start laying some gray paint down here on these hills. Lightening it up coming from the right because that's where my light source is. Building more grays up here in the foreground. Later on, I'll add some texture up there, thinking about it like it's a meadow. Making sure that whatever color I'm using jumps across and is the same on both sides. I don't want to like have a totally separate color, like all of a sudden on one side of the river it's one color, and on the other side of the river it's a totally different color. So I'm going to come in here with some of these grays, add a little more texture, putting these grays in the sky. The gray in the sky is going to have quite a lot of light in it. The sky actually, the reason the sky doesn't look dark is because it's reflecting light. It's capturing light. So the light that comes into our planet, hits our planet, bounces off of our planet, hits the inner atmosphere, and then reflects back to us again. So that's why at night there's not a lot of light to reflect back. So the sky doesn't look so doesn't look light. It looks dark, which is how it normally is. Adding more light to the side of these hills. Okay. Some of this kind of, after it dried, that side still looks different. So I'm going to kind of put some of this in here on the other side. Okay. And the mountains really shouldn't be like black because as things get further apart away, you start losing value. You start losing the effect of light and dark. It's called atmospheric perspective. Europeans, or at least English-speaking Europeans like the British, call it aerial perspective. So if you ever hear someone talking about aerial perspective, they're talking about what most people in this country call atmospheric perspective, which means that as things get further away, a couple things happen. We're looking through layers of air, which is a physical thing. Air is not without a physical structure. So air is actually blocking our view, so things can get lighter, they can get grayer, and they can also get bluer. So as things get further away, we kind of lose color, but we also shift towards the blue side of the spectrum because the different colors of light rays travel at different speeds, and blue gets further. That's why, water tends to look blue because water is filtering out light, and it's better at filtering like the red side of the spectrum than it is at filtering the blue side of the spectrum. So here I go, I'm kind of like shifting some of the color in the sky a little bit, letting my paint get thicker. Completely obliterated that tree because I happen to know it will be easier to just paint like it's not there and then add stuff on top. I'm going to come in with some pure white here, add some implied clouds while it's still wet. As they get further down, things in the sky are getting closer to us. So just like things on the ground, as they move up, are getting, as they move down in the sky, they're getting further away from us. Just like in the bottom of the picture, as things move up, they're getting further away from us. So I want to make sure my clouds down near the bottom are much smaller than my clouds at the top. That's important. Going to make a pretty light gray here for down the light side of the mountain. Notice how I'm letting this color kind of be rough with the brush to create some additional textures, but also I want it to follow the shape of the mountain a little. So you see I'm let some valleys or things form as I let it come down the mountain. Okay, so I've got my mountains back here, my low hills. I've got my field up in the front, which I'll start working on in a little minute. And now I need to work on my lake. So the first thing that's going to be in my lake, my hills are probably a little too low. Maybe I'll imply a little bit here, imply a little bit here, and then some of my mountains might show. Leaving at the far edge, I'm kind of leaving a light layer or a line. I'll come back and add that into this. And on the near side of the lake, it's going to be the sky reflecting. You'll notice I'm not letting this dry. Just working on it. The stuff that's really flat dries pretty fast, but then the stuff that I've allowed to get wetter or be thicker, will start to take a little longer to dry. Okay. So I'm not showing a lot of reflection here because this is a pretty small painting. But when I go to do my final, I'll probably show a lot more reflection if I can do it. If I can get it to work for me. If I had water. I don't even know if my picture is going to have water. Still just working only in black and white. Okay, now in the foreground, let me get the camera closer. So now, in the foreground, I've got all these grass, I want this to be like a field or grasses and stuff. So I'm going to have a lot of contrast too because it's close to me. So I'm going to start by kind of laying in some of these shapes with this rough brush and my dark color. And again, I want to think about horizontal movement. Even though the grass is growing up, I want to think about how it might grow in like strands that appear to be clumped horizontally, because as things sit down on the picture plane, they tend to stretch out horizontally. So I'm thinking about that, laying these grasses in. Stuff in the front, in the foreground, I'm gonna let it get a little taller, and I'm gonna let it get a little darker too, because that stuff's much closer to me than the stuff as it gets further away. Okay. I got this grass. Then I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to start laying this tree in with black. Oops, a little too watery. Sky is already dry-ish, dry enough. So I'm going to come up down off the tip and just kind of put a clump out like that. Keep it a little random. Let it slightly curve out. And overlap, but still in kind of like these clumps that represent like boughs of the tree. Near the bottom, I might add some grass-like textures, but like also implying the shadow of the tree. Okay. And now I'm going to come in with the white. It'll get a little bit watered down. I might lay some grasses in with the white. And I might do it in such a way that the tops of the grasses are catching the light, so they're kind of white, but the bottoms of the grasses are kind of staying dark because they're down where the shadows, the grass itself is like shading itself. Always thinking about how some of these things might like actually operate in the real world. Okay. And then the tree on the right side might just catch some light here. So that's where the light's coming from, using like little marks. The whole tree is pretty much a silhouette except for those little marks. Okay. And then in the far hills, I think I could water down some of this dark and maybe like kind of put a little more definition in the lake shape, a little more texture on the hills. With this little brush, watering it down so it's not too dark. That's a little too dark. I just have a clean wet brush and I just kind of spread this around before it has a chance to dry. And do some on the mountains too, and this time I'm gonna let them kind of like break and be rougher to imply some of like the actual textures on the mountain. Also going to take this brush, get a medium dark color, not too watered down, just making some little vertical flicks, implying little trees off in the distance. Again, once they get on the mountains, they're almost like just dots. And they should be running up the mountain in a shape because different parts of the mountain will channel water, they'll catch shade, they'll show sunlight. So you have to think about how the trees will capitalize on some of these structures of the mountain. And again, these ones that are really far away are really tiny. Gonna keep those real small, like barely touching the brush, using my other hand to control it so that it can't get down in there. So no real detail in these, they're just marks way far away. And then one last thing I'm going to do with horizontal marks, I'm going to lay in some very fine texture of the water. And this is a super small painting, so I'm keeping it really low key and letting it actually come all the way down here. These, again, this is closer, so these marks can get a little bigger. And then I'll come in after I do the dark marks and do some light marks up here. And it implies some of the texture of the water as the wind passes over it. I'm going to let that rest a minute, I'm going to go look through some old pictures and try and find a cool landscape picture to work from. So while this dries, go look for a picture and then come back and I'll show you the end of the demo. All right, I went and got my did a little research for a picture that I could use, and my painting is dry now, so I'm going to go to the next step, and I'm just going to mix a green color, but I'm not going to let the green color be too like intense green. So I'm going to go ahead and mix a little bit of red into it to neutralize it. So I've got a more natural looking green. And I'm going to water this down quite a lot. And I'm just going to glaze it on where the grass is. Literally watered down paint. So it's letting the black and white show through. I'm not trying to paint it or be too careful. I'm just kind of glazing it over here. Now, as things move further away, they're going to get more blue and more gray. So I'm going to add a little bit of blue to this green. I'm going to add a little bit of black to the green. Water this down. Again. Oops. And I'm going to use this on these hills, but I'm also going to kind of overlap it and come down a little into the foreground, just to show that parts of the foreground are much further away than the other parts. On this side, the lake's blocking it, so I don't have to do that. Maybe it's too blue, so I added a little bit of the first color back into it. And this, while I have this color, some of this might be reflecting in here, so I'm going to dab a little bit of this down in there. Even let that lightness kind of catch it. Okay, and then I'm going to mix a pretty intense green that's a little less yellowy, because the first one I made was pretty yellowy, so this one's going to be a little more green. But I am going to still neutralize it with a little bit of that red. That, I'm going to water it down pretty good, and I'm going to lay it in on the tree. You'll notice how the color is leaving the integrity mostly of the black and white, but it's shifting it just a little bit. And I'm not trying to be too aggressive here. I'm just carefully, oh, you didn't see that. I'm just carefully kind of glazing these things in. While they're still wet, there's a lot of sheen on them, but as they dry, you'll see kind of how that color left and changed. So then I'm going to take this red, I'm going to neutralize it with the blue. Oh, I over neutralized it. I'm going to try and get like a gray brown color. It's almost purpley for the far mountains. Watering it down. I can always add more, but it's hard to add less. And at the very top, I'm not going to add this. Oh, I think I could have gone even more brown than this. This is pretty purple. And we're not working from a reference, so we don't have real colors to be referencing right now. This one's got no snow caps. It's a lower mountain. So then I'm going to try and get in here and make this a little browner. think I could push this a little further because it's still gray back there. I'm going to add some yellow and a little more of this red orange. And then water this down. It'll mix with the color that's there anyway. Again, this one here is not going to have any snow caps, so I'm just going to glaze the whole thing. I'm even using a little more paint, so it's a little more intense. Adding a little more of these shapes here. And I might kind of come in and just nibble a little bit around that here, just so that there's some variation in the color. And I'm going to put some of this on as the mountain here. That's mostly being reflected. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this blue color I've got, water it down pretty good so that it's very thin, and I'm going to leave the clouds behind. Let it get a little stronger. I think I watered it down more than I needed to. Especially at the top of the sky, I'm going to let it have a little more color. I'm going to let it fade down to a lighter color at the bottom by using a little more watered down version. I'm still just relying on that initial painting that was underneath the black and white painting. That is going to be my foundation for this whole thing. It is how we're going to do our actual projects. Even letting a little bit of the blue pop in here on the mountain. Oh, and this far mountain, I think I'm going to glaze the whole thing with blue just to make it look like it's even further away than the rest. Like really pushes it back there and gives it that vibe. But before I get too far, whatever's in the sky has to show in the water. This is why water gives us the feeling that it's blue, because it's reflecting the sky, and the water in the air is making the sky reflect different colors differently. I might not be 100% right on the science there. You guys have the internet to teach you real stuff, so don't listen to me. All right, one last thing. I'm going to come in here with some pure white, and on the light side of the mountain, I'm going to pop those snow caps with some pure white, and then I'm going to pop the clouds. They were kind of in that sky, but when I do the clouds, I'm going to leave the bottoms of the clouds like this grayish color, like they're catching, like they've got shadows on them. And adding a little bit of textural clouds there too. And then I'm also going to take this fine brush and the white, and on top of this water, it's not even dry all the way, but I'm going to come in with some highlights. And this will look better on a big painting. On a teeny painting, it's hard to get the subtlety I need. And this is just to show the reflections of the brightness of the water. It's like reflecting the sun kind of behind me a little bit. Okay. And then one last thing, on the far side of the mountain, that snow, I'm going to mix a little bit of a blue-gray color. Because I feel like it doesn't quite look like there's snow on the shadow side. So this is the color of the shadow snow. I can push it a little more, I think. Okay. And if I wanted to, I could even take a little bit of that color watered down and streak it on some of the bottoms of these clouds just to give them a little more depth and dimension. I'm not going too crazy with it, keeping it light. Okay, and so there, quickly, I've made a landscape. I did not labor over the color part of it. When I did it, I was really focused on the black and white, and I did that well enough that I was able to come in and just lightly glaze some color over the top and really bring that whole thing to life. I could even at the end here, and I'm going to do it, I could even kind of imply some like meadow flowers here. And I'm going to even dab out some of the color so I don't just end up with dots of paint. I'm imagining these flowers are really small and far away. Sometimes those last little touches just really like make all the difference to bring the whole thing together. So that is how we paint with black and white and then use glazing to add the color. It is a technique you're going to use for the next project, and it is a technique that is traditional, and it is a technique that I find can be very successful quickly, so that you can actually do the work, like do really good work really quickly. So it's something to think about. That's our paint along for the day. You go ahead and turn that in, but also turn in the landscape picture that you're going to work from. I will give you feedback on the landscape picture if I think you should try and choose something else, and you're going to paint that in black and white first.